also working. Come on, catch up. There we go. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Sound on. Yep. Cool. All right. Let's start with some hand reviews, and then from there, we're going to move on to the next section of the tournament masterclass. Didn't end up playing yesterday. Um, as soon as I ended the morning stream, I was like, all right, I can't wait to play. And then I realized I was like, you know what, maybe I'll start at like 1. And then I was like, yeah, I looked over the tournaments, that's cool. And then I went away and I ate and did some stuff. And then I was like, maybe I'll start at 2. And I went back and looked at tournaments and I was like, yeah, that's cool. And then I was like, well, maybe 3 o'clock. And then I kind of realized I was just really fucking tired. For some reason, it just caught up to me, so I just laid down at 4 and fucking didn't wake up till like 7 o'clock at night. So played little cash games, but definitely didn't have it in me to play tournaments yesterday. Today I feel really good. It's probably going to be a play day, which usually doesn't happen on Monday, so this should be fun. And Mondays are much different than Sundays, but hey, why not? So let's go ahead and get into this and see where we go from here. How are my levels over here? It's okay. It's a little low, but it's fine. I'm just kind of talking quiet. All right, let me turn this down. Okay, 10-8. This is all Zoom poker, by the way. So 10-8, we see a limp. We obviously defend. The 8 comes off. Player bets, half potish, whatever. There's not much in the pot, so it doesn't really matter. I decided to go ahead and check raise right away. He calls. Turn comes off 7. Pick up a gut shot. Still should be ahead most of the time. I bet big. And the thing of it is here, my bets aren't going to convince anybody that I have a 6, even though I'm in the big blind, because I'm making them too quickly and too big. Immediately when he bet on the flop, I snapped 3x that. And then on the turn, as soon as the 7 hit, I just snap bet it again. He decides to go ahead and raise me, which at the time, I honestly felt like I could be up against a hand like 8-9 that has, picked up equity. There's possibilities of a flush draw. But I honestly didn't feel like it was too bad for me overall. I really couldn't gauge where I was at. Maybe he's got an overpair that picked up something like 10s or something, whatever. Um, the 9 comes off, and the instant the 9 came off, and I mean the instant it came off, I snap jammed for this exact purpose. He does call, and on the turn, he picked up a bunch of equity with the straight draw and flush draw. We probably could have gotten it in on the turn, which is great. But making the 9 on the river, and he just calls me off with a pair. I did it so quickly, I don't think he even realized there was a 4-card flush. I think he just saw a pair because he called me like that. So he obviously never put me on a 6. And this was a nice way to win a big pot. And it was the speed of the betting that really did it. Pocket 8s. We see a raise here. I did go ahead and 3-bet the button. I'm doing this a bit more now. Just because I am getting tired of getting squeezed in the small and big blinds. And I find in Zoom, when there's a raise and a call, the squeeze is like 50-50. And I don't really want to face, a raise here and then a call and then a re-raise here. So it's the kind of thing where I'm just deciding to try and take control of the hand. I do get 4-bet, which isn't ideal, right? But we're super deep. It cost me, 16 blinds to win like 51 and a half, and so that's 3-1. Plus he has plenty of chips behind, so I'm obviously getting the odds to call. I do go ahead and call it. This is a very stressful hand, believe it or not, from here. Player bets 18 big blinds. Semi-standard. He could have an overpair. He could have ace-king. I don't really want to lose him, but at the same time, I don't want to blow him off the pot, but at the same time, I don't want to just let a card come off, because if I just call, we still have 100 and like 148 blinds to get in. Like we're effectively the same stack, so we still have a lot to get in. So this raise is really designed to build the pot, make it easier to get the money in when down the line. Turn comes off 9 of diamonds, not ideal, but we only have a pot size bet left. Player checks. I decide that I'm really not going to fold because it's super rare he's going to have 2 diamonds. So I decide to check it and let the river diamond come off. It should be pretty easy to get it in, or the river card come off. Should be pretty easy to get in. As long as the diamond doesn't come off, I should be okay. Sometimes that saves me because over pairs with the diamond aren't going to fold, but then again, I don't need to get to the river and be busted. He checks. I decide to bet half pot. Looking back, I guess I lost money on this one because we probably could have just gotten it in on the turn. And really, it's only exactly ace king of diamonds that I'm worried about. I didn't think about it that hard. I kind of just thought he was on an overpair. So I figured go for this bet. I probably could have just jammed it, right? Because I don't ever have diamonds here. There shouldn't be any straights, although jamming the river with a straight would be the best move if I had sixes or something. He does call. I'm kind of up in the air about this. He had pocket queens. I think if he had pocket aces, all the money would have won in easier. But I did 3-bet, and he did just call, so I could have kings or aces. And if I have aces with the ace of diamonds, this is kind of the way I'm playing it. Yeah. On the flop, obviously, my bet was correct, raising, because he wasn't one of those guys who would just jam get it all in with queens. So I like the check on the turn half the time, and I think I should have kept betting in this instance specifically. Like if I bet half pot on the turn, he's probably just going to get it in. And at that instance, you know, if he has ace king of diamonds, it's just too bad. But I should be getting the money in on this turn. So I'm going to count this as a mistake, even though I won pretty big. Sorry, I have to respond to Courtney. There we go. Yeah, she's on her way home in a little bit. All right, so that was a fun hand. Stressful at the time. Ace king offsuit. See a raise. I've been doing this a lot more where I've been calling from the blinds. This is in position. I probably should 3-bet this, but I'm super strong, so I'm kind of playing the ace king a lot as a trap. I flop the monster. Player bets 2/3 pot. Really no reason to raise. I mean, we're trying to get the money in, but I doubt we're going to be able to. Turn is an ace. I have the super nuts. There is no hand that will beat me. He checks, and I decide to check back. There's only 12 blinds in the pot. I probably could have bet something, right? But then again, I'm like so high up there that I'm kind of looking to do something wacky on the river. Maybe I should have bet like 6 blinds just to build the pot up so we can make, you know, better choices. But the river comes off 7 of spades. Now he can have a flush. That's great. He goes for a full pot bet. And when I see that, usually this full pot bet means he has something he likes. So in an instance where somebody has something they like and you have the nuts, you need to raise, and you need to raise pretty big. I think I actually could have gone bigger than this. This is a little bit over a pot size bet. I think I could have actually gone like 60 or 70 blinds. And you'll see that this is an instance where I think that would have worked because this player called me so fucking wide that he just had to see it. I think this is one of those ones where if I just made it like 60 or 70 blinds, you know, like an extra, you know, 10 or 20, he would have been like, well, I got to see what this joker's doing. You know what I'm saying? Because it would be near impossible for me to have a flush here. And why would you raise it just an ace on the river? Now, truth of the matter is I would, but only because the pot was so small. But he's right. But calling here is obviously not good. I could just have something that I turned into a bluff that still beats you. You know, like a king or like a weak-ass ace. You know, we'll see. But, you know, it's interesting what people call you with. Hey, what's up, DeBaus? How you doing, my man? So we see a raise, a big open, 3.5, which is really big. Usually it's 2.5 standard. I do decide to call it because I'm in position with the suited ace. Player now bets full pot. And seems scary, right? Not really. If you had a good hand here, you would not want to bet full pot. You would not blow somebody off of this. Even if you had ace-king, I think you would bet more reasonably. So I just call. Turn comes off. There's my gin card. Player bets the full pot again. I decide to just call again. I feel like there's nothing here that's going to beat me, ever. We make the full house even. Player bets the full pot. I decide to jam a ram. It's only a little bit more, so obviously he's going to call me. A lot of times it's a chop, but honestly, with his betting structure, I didn't feel like that was the case. He does call just to see it for the extra 12 blinds and rolls over a queen. Don't really know what he was thinking the whole time. Maybe he thought that I was on a flush draw, right? But he never gave me a chance to tell him that. So, it goes bet, bet. And then I miss the flush draw. And then, jam the river against him. Like, you never beat anything here. He's just calling because it's so little. And, I might be playing it versus a chop. But, yeah, this was just hilarious. Played my first knockout tourney, got 2 knockouts, but missed the money by 1 spot. That'll happen a lot. And that's the nice thing about knockouts, is that when you get knockouts, you cover some of your buy-in. There is factors to winning the knockouts, but unless it's progressive, you kind of have to not give it as much credence as everybody else. I've won knockout tournaments where I won exactly 2 bounties. The other player's bounty, the guy who came in second, and my own. It's just happens sometimes, because when the bounty payout is flat, like if you enter a $20 tournament and everybody gets a $5 bounty every time you knock somebody out, if you're the guy not chasing those $5, you can actually win the tournament fairly easily. Now, in a progressive knockout, it's different because the bounties are worth so much more. And they get bigger the whole way. Let's see. We see a raise 2 big blinds. I decided to go ahead and 3-bet it. This is another one that's like 50-50 for me. I just like 3-betting in the cutoff. I didn't want to fold this one. If it was suited, I would have just called because the hand's strong enough. But I decided to 3-bet. Get called, make a 10. Pretty much the best flop for me. Player now bets full pot. You have to ask yourself, are players ever doing this with an overpair or a set? No. This is, at best case scenario, this is top pair. And ace 10 would be a hell of a coincidence. There's a lot more 10s lower than me. Queen 10, Jack 10, that lower than me, than there are higher than me. So usually this is just a draw. So I decided to go ahead and raise it right here because this is usually Queen Jack. And if we can get the money in versus Queen Jack, that's fine because we're even holding a king. So he doesn't have 8 outs. He has 7, right? Plus the pair outs. But we have redraws against all that. It's just a really connected, our hands are just really kind of intertwined. He does just go ahead and call, which also screams that it's the draw. The turn comes off. He decides to go ahead and lead jam it. This means absolutely nothing. So we just go ahead and call it. Jack on the river. I could get beat by that Queen Jack, but nope. He had the Queen 10, top pair, and he lost his mind. And I'll bet you, if you had asked him pre-flop, is he willing to lose 140 blind or 120 blinds with top pair Queen kicker? He would have told you, I'll never do that in my entire fucking life. But we got him there. Yeah, I missed the money in all my tourneys today, but covered my buy-ins in cash games. Yeah, that's why you play cash games, man. I once heard a long-time cash game player who I was helping with tournaments back in the day, and we were both playing a lot of cash games live. And he said, tournaments change your life, but cash games make your life. So, like, the cash games are the day-to-day. You know what I'm saying? When you play tournament poker. So, yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, stay up on your cash games. And you can look at cash games. This is what I like to do. Just look at cash games as deep stack in tournaments. Because it's the same thing. So you can basically be practicing your tournament philosophies in the early levels, right? So every time you stack somebody in a cash game, because you just have 100 blinds, right? Every time you stack somebody, you can think of that like doubling up early in a tournament. You know what I'm saying? And it's nice because then you can remove your chips from the table and then buy back in and the whole thing. But you can look at it in the same principles that apply to early stages of cash games when everybody's got 100 blinds. The same principles apply in cash games. It's the same poker. All right, so that's all these. And now we're getting into the second part of this section. I think we're going to try to finish this today. This section's kind of long, but there's only 4 more sections. Maybe we'll finish. Kind of depends how quickly we get through. I'm not against getting this broken down into 2 more sections, but I think I kind of like it trying to get through it today because I feel good. All right, so this is the 12 to 22 big blind level. We started this one yesterday. We're almost halfway through, and we're now facing a pre-flop raise. So you have 12 to 22 big blinds, facing a raise.
Now let's discuss when you're facing a pre-flop raise, when you have between 12 and 22 big blinds. As always, you want to be asking yourself a few questions. What is your opponent's raising range? If they are really, really tight, you should proceed very cautiously. If they are overly loose, you should be playing very aggressively because they're going to fold way too often if you re-raise them. Next, how likely are you to get 3-bet if you call? If you know someone yet to act is going to be re-raising, well then clearly you want to only be calling when you have a very, very strong hand. Because otherwise you're just going to call with your marginal hand, they're going to go all in. Or
I'm going to break this up here. So you said today was the first time you can say you truly put someone on a hand and it got you all their chips. That's awesome. I will say as a general rule, you want to put people on a range of hands, right? And react accordingly. But man, those times when you're sitting there going, oh, you have king, queen. So now my ace, king is a monster. You know what I'm saying? It's not just one pair. Now my top pair, king, ace, kicker is a monster. That's an amazing feeling. And it still gets me to this day. It does happen, on a daily basis, but it's so much fun. And playing live poker, that was the thing that really made me fall in love again with poker after playing it for my whole life and just kind of, when I moved to Vegas in 2005, one of the first things I did was, I went looking for a job. And after I got the job, dealing poker at the Imperial Palace, I went and played at the, iconic Stardust Casino. And I was living right behind it in a budget suites. And I went in and played cash games. And I didn't have much money. I only had like $600 to my name, and I was buying in for $200. Had pocket sixes and knew he had ace five by the turn. Nice. Was it like two pair versus a set or something? We both had a boat, and I had the overpair. Ah, nice. So you hit the sixes full, and he had the fives full of aces. Pretty good. It's always great when that happens, when you just like know your opponent has a strong one, so you can just go bananas. But I was playing at the Stardust, and I won, and I was a winning session, and I needed the money like bad. Like I won $400 and turned 200 into 600, and that was great because it covered my next week's bills before I ever even, because I didn't know how much money I was going to make dealing poker. I didn't know what I was going to do if I couldn't pay for the weekly, because it was like $280 a week. It was brutal, and it was a shithole. But so winning that 400, and as I left, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go walk the strip. And I walked down a little bit, and I went to the little Walgreens that was over there, got some ramen and shit like that. And I felt this amazing connection to humanity, because what I kept doing while I was playing live there, and I hadn't played too much live before that, like especially not No Limit Hold'em. I had played some stud when I was younger, but I hadn't played much live poker at all. And I was basically applying principles that I, used online. And I was way ahead of the curve, because back in 2005, not many people got in as much time playing online as I did at the stakes I did. And I remember feeling very connected to the human race. And I was out here by myself, and I didn't feel alone anymore, because while I was at the table, I was able to say, oh, I remember my stage of development when I was sitting there like you are, and this is what I would have done in this scenario. So if I wanted to bluff, I would make the bet that would make me fold. And if I wanted to get the call or get a raise, I would make the bet that would make me do that when I was at this person's stage of development. And it just worked so perfectly. And in about 3 hours, without really making too many great hands, like a lot of one pair, two pair hands was it. I don't think I even made a set. I was able to pick up, $400, which playing 1-2 is 200 blinds, man. That's pretty awesome. And I remember getting this warm feeling all over that my ability to put myself in the other player's shoes and see things from where they were made me be able to dominate and win the game. And in the end, nobody hated me for winning, and I was the only guy winning at the table. Like, they all really liked me, and I was having a good time, and I was chit-chatting and talking and, having a great time. It would have been very easy not to show up for my job at the Imperial Palace, but it was dealing poker. Starting to get better with bet sizing makes a big difference. Yeah, that's one of the first complicated, after you learn about position, and just the general concept, bet sizing becomes the next big thing that you have to kind of really consider what your bets say, what they mean, and when they're effective. Like, bigger bets don't scare people, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't scare you, because usually bigger bets, people are doing that to Hulk smash a flop, you know what I'm saying, and try to get you out of there. But you have to be reasonable. You can't just bet pot. Like you just saw, the guy just bet pot, bet pot, bet pot, and just did it to try to get me out of there because he decided I was on a flush draw. And all I had to do was hit call 3 times and took his whole stack, you know? So, interesting. All right, let's try to get through some of this.
Re-raise and you're going to fold, which would be terrible. If you know you're going to see the pot heads up, then that's fine, right? You can flat call way wider if you're going to be getting 3-bet very infrequently. You want to ask also how many people are likely to see the flop, because especially as your stack to pot ratio decreases, you can still conceivably play implied odds hands, especially if you're going to see the flop very multi-way. For example, if someone raises to 2 big blinds and you have pocket 2s in middle position, this is a spot where you should probably just fold normally, but if you know 4 other people are going to call, well then now you're putting in 2 big blinds to win something like 12 or 13 big blinds from the pot. So right there you're getting 6.5 to 1 implied odds. Plus you can get another 18 big blinds in post flop, which will result in you getting another 9 to 1, which is greater than your 10 to 1 implied odds that you need to realize. So you definitely want to pay attention to how often other people are calling at this stack depth. I will say though, usually when you start to get shallower, you're going to play more heads up pots in general, because people realize they just can't be putting in 2 big blinds out of their 20 big blind stack with all sorts of garbage, because they will quickly run out of chips. You also want to ask how the initial raiser will respond to aggression. If he's just going to fold every time if you go all in, then clearly going all in is great. So facing an early position raise, you should tend to assume they have strong ranges, because most people realize once they start to get shallow that they really can't mess around all that much. And this hand could be their last if it goes poorly. So you're going to find that you, in turn, must proceed cautiously. And you'll actually see that whenever you are also in early or middle position, at this stack depth, you usually have no calling range at all. You are re-raising, 3-betting every hand you're going to play. And at this stack depth, the only 3-bet size that makes logical sense is an all-in. You may say, all-in for 15 or 20 big blinds facing a raise? Yeah. And the reason you can't call from under the gun +1, under the gun +2, low jack, hijack, or cutoff against an early position raise is because it's too likely the button, small blind, or big blind is going to go all in and then force you to fold the vast majority of your marginal calling range. So,
and the thing to keep in mind is, if you're going with a, jamming, 12 to 22 blinds or 25 blinds, whatever it is, if that's your philosophy, that you're not 3-betting much at all, unless you're trying to get the money in, like if you have aces or kings. If a guy raises in first and you're in middle and you have, aces and you have 20, 5+ big blinds, maybe somewhere in there, then 3-betting to 6 big blinds is reasonable, because even if he just calls, there's 12 in the middle, you have 19 behind, it's very easy to get the money in, and that's what you're trying to do with aces, kind of no matter what, when you get to that point at the tournament. But when you have 20 blinds and somebody raises and you're sitting there trying to decide whether or not your hand is good enough to play, just remember you can't 3-bet unless your sole intention is to get all the money in. So if you look at your hand and you go, well, I don't want to call here because this hand's not strong enough to call. I'm not getting the right implied odds. There's people who could raise behind me. And then you go, is this hand strong enough to go all in? Meaning, if I make one pair with this hand, is it good enough? So obvious answers, ace-king, sure. Ace-queen in a lot of situations, hell yeah. Ace-jack, now you're getting to, what kind of player did he raise? What position am I in? How many players are left to act behind me? If you're in the big blind and under the gun raise with ace-jack, and you know the player to be opening fairly wide, then, not even fairly wide, but just, maybe a little bit improperly, you can happily jam the ace-jack for 20 big blinds, because you're going to get called by all pairs, and, you have an ace blocker, it's pretty good, and you're going to get a lot of folds from somebody who's opening too wide. So if you go with the all-in or fold mentality after the raise, then it makes your decisions much easier, because you think, I have to play for all of it if I'm called, instead of just realizing that you're never going to 3-bet and get a fold when you're that short, especially when a bigger stack is playing against you. I've seen players who, I've had the aces, they've raised under the gun, I've 3-bet in under the gun +1, it goes all the way back around to them, they call, I got about 18 blinds left behind, the flop comes off jack high, they check, I c-bet standard, and they jam on me, and I just call, and they roll over pocket nines. Don't even know what they're thinking, but that's a player who had a monster stack, who was, chip drunk, and just deep in a tournament, just decided he was invulnerable. And when he would have been just better off just jamming it pre-flop versus most of my 3-betting range. But I'm not going to have a weak 3-betting range, but he doesn't know that. So the all-in after, the 3-bet all-in being the only option is really a good way to look at the tournament at this stage, because it makes you make easier decisions. You can sit there and go, king queen here, nah, fuck that, and you can just fold it away. Or you can go, well, you know what, king queen is the jam here. If like cutoff open and you're on the button, king queen's the jam. You know what I'm saying? So it's just an easier, simpler way to think about it.
So in turn, you just have to play very, very tightly yourself. So take a look against an under the gun raise. When you're in early position as well, you only get to play 7% of hands. That's really just the absolute best hands. And you are going all in with all of these. Same thing from low jack and hijack. You also have to be very tight. You see your range just gets only a little bit wider. Once you get to the cutoff, you're still playing pretty tight, but you do get to widen your range a little bit. And then only from the button, the small blind, and the big blind do you get to have a calling range. And even then, you'll see that the calling range is usually going to be consisting of something like aces and then a bunch of reasonably strong but marginal-ish hands that really like to see the flop. Like, as you see, king, queen offsuit, good suited connectors, good suited aces, well, marginal suited aces, and then the small pairs. You will find, in general, the same patterns we've just shown before apply. Usually whenever you are going all in, it's going to be these strong, medium value type hands. Like as you see here, we have all the medium pairs liking to go all in. We have some strong big card type hands that are suited, and some big ace high type hands that are electing to go in. And you may say, if I flat call on the button with these marginal suited hands, doesn't that make me susceptible to getting re-raised? And the thing is usually the players from the small blind and big blind should not be re-raising all that often. And also these hands flop pretty well. And you notice that whenever you do have pocket ace,
they shouldn't be raising all that often because the initial raiser was under the gun. This is the guy in first position raising. The guy on the button, you, calls, with hands like 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited, Jack-10 suited, 5s, 4s, these little hands in green. This player calls. Somebody in the small blind really has to have a monster here. Like, they have to have queens plus or ace-king to 3-bet. They really have to have a good hand that they're willing to play for a ton of chips, because they're up against the first position guy who should have the strongest range, and they're up against the button who has the strongest position. Just, there's no guesswork. The button is the strongest position. He always acts last. So the small blind and big blind raising there is going to be super rare, because they're going to have a top tier hand. And the truth of the matter is, under the gun opened, he's going to have a lot of top tier hands, so it takes away the probability. So his positional open is basically blockers versus the small and big blind, because they're in the worst position. So they should only be looking to play hands for huge pots, re-raising, and mitigating the positional advantage that you hold on the button. It's not a great squeeze spot. Now, if I was in the hijack or cutoff, different story. You know what I'm saying? Because I would be worried about the button. But you know what? In this exact scenario, that's why the small blind and big blind won't raise much. So this button calling range is valid. And you do have aces in there, too, to trap it.
Aces, your opponents are just going to randomly run into your absolute nut hands, which is going to crush them. From the small blind as well, you're going to find you get to call somewhat wide. This is because you're getting better pot odds. And from the big blind, you always just get to play a really wide range, and that is also the case when we are shallow stacked, because we're putting in one big blind to try to win a 5.5 big blind pot, which lets us play very wide. So we see same pattern holds true as we are facing a even later position raise, still from the hijack versus the low jack and cutoff versus hijack or low jack. We're just jamming it all in with every hand we're going to play. From the button, small blind, and big blind, we get to have a flat calling range with the similar composition of hands still continuing. Usually the good, strong, suited hands and suited aces like calling. A few big cards can justify calling from these other positions. But definitely make sure you understand the principles that come from these charts. And the main one here is that whenever you're facing a raise and you're not on the button, small blind, or big blind, you should just be all in. And that's something a lot of people do not do. They instead call, try to flop well, but sometimes someone you attack is going to jam, or even the player on the button is going to call, and that allows them to be in position against you. And it's just not a good spot to be in. From the late positions, this is where you can start to get out of line again, and that's because many players will raise with far too many hands from late position and then defend poorly if you re-raise. Here are the implementable game theory optimal charts, though. Button versus cutoff, you see a very wide all-in range, right? With a little bit of flat calling still. Small blind versus cutoff uses a pure all-in strategy, as does small blind versus button, just always ripping it all in with every hand you plan on playing. And that's because from the cutoff or the button, those players are starting to raise a reasonably wide range, and now you just have a lot of pre-flop fold equity. Big blind versus cutoff and big blind versus button, as you see, you still get to play just a very, very wide range. And you need to get comfortable with that. You need to learn to play post-flop well, which we will be discussing later in the post-flop section. Now, blind versus blind play 15 big blinds deep. This is a bit of a mess. I know these charts are very confusing, but make sure you study them, make sure you reference them, because they definitely are very relevant. So here is what the small blind should be doing when everyone folds to the small blind, okay? They're jamming it all in with the hands in blue, and they're limping the hands in green. So big blind versus the small blind limp. That's when the big blind has all the hands in green. The big blind should raise all in with the ace-x offsuits and the small pairs, and then raise small with all the other very strong hands, plus a smattering of blocker bluffs and very low equity hands. By doing that, when you raise, your opponent's not going to know if you have a really good hand you're planning on not folding, or a junky hand that you definitely plan on folding. Okay? If the big blind does just open shove all in, as you see, that's going to be with the hands in blue. The player in the big blind gets to call off with just all the reasonably strong hands. All right, now over here, small blind limp versus a big blind raise. So this is when the small blind limps all these hands in green, and the big blind raises using this strategy here in red. Now the small blind goes all in with the all suited aces, some good suited blockers, and then king, queen, and the middle pairs. Calls with all these hands that flop reasonably well, and then folds the junk. You may say, why are we calling with all these junky, bad suited hands? Well, the issue is we're just going to be getting good enough pot odds to justify calling those. Then if you do flop any one pair type hand after the flop with this stack depth, you're usually just happy enough getting your money in. Here's what happens if the small blind limps and the big blind goes all in with this range here, these hands in blue. Now it just calls off with all these hands in green, and that makes logical sense because all these hands in green are in great shape against these hands in blue. And big blind versus the small blind limp shove. So this is when small blind limps, using the range in green. Small blind then goes all in with these hands in green, right? The big blind then calls off with all these hands right here in red that it initially raised, and then folds out the obvious blockers, which makes logical sense. You're going to find that when you're using just a very clear polarized strategy, usually your decision is very, very obvious because you fold out the junk, call the nuts. So that's what's happening on this bottom right-hand chart. So those are really all the situations that can happen when the small blind, when it folds to the small blind. So definitely understand the principles that come from this. And
it's good to recognize that these charts all play off each other. You know, small blind raises first in, big blind versus small blind limp, big blind versus small blind limp versus big blind raise. So when you limp in the small blind with these hands in green and this big blind raises, now you're going all in with, you know, the hands in blue, and you're just calling with the hands in green, and you're folding the hands in black. It's good to understand that every move in a game theory optimal situation, every move has a counter punch. So this is where you start. You know, let's just give you 10-9 off, right? You start by limping it in the small blind. The big blind raises, and he raises to 3.5 big blinds. You have, you know, 15 big blinds. The 10-9 offsuit now goes ahead and calls in the small blind versus that, because when it makes a pair or gets a draw, you can probably just jam it in or even check jam with top pair, because it's good enough to get in your last, you know, 11.5 big blinds. But you can see the punch counter punch that's going on here, and this is playing these charts off each other. So small blind limps, big blind versus a small blind limp is going to raise all these hands in red, and when that happens, then the 10-9 can respond perfectly. Now, when that happens, and let's say the small blind strategy is to go all in, ace king suited, let's say, right? Now it's back to the big blind, and he has these. He can only call you all in with these hands in green. So there's a punch, counter punch and then response. So understand that every move has a move that you can play against it. This is a philosophy that you should adopt for every situation in poker. If you find yourself getting into situations where you absolutely don't know what the fuck to do, figure out what the exact situation is. There's a great example that I have coming up in the next Jedi Mind Trick where I'm floating the flop, getting bet at on the turn, and most of the time that's a fold, but I still feel like this player is weak. I've started check raising it with air. And there's been like 7 or 8 examples of playing Zoom poker where this has come up in the past week, and it's worked every fucking time. And it's just something that I came up with because the idea was to call a weak c-bet on the flop, and then on the turn when they go check, when we go check and they check back, then on the river, bet the river, and then they fold. Very effective move. But when I check and they continue betting, but I know that they're still weak by the size of their bet, then I can just raise them and push them off the pot. Oh, floating? Floating is like, it basically means calling with nothing, with relatively nothing, with the intention of bluffing later. So, a perfect example. Let's say I'm on the button with King Jack, right, suited, and I raise. And the big blind, I'm in the small blind, okay? And player in the low jack, let's say, right? So I'm in the small blind. Then there's the button, cutoff, hijack. Let's say he's in the hijack, right? So he raises, okay? And I call it with the King Jack in the small blind. I have good blockers. It's suited, so I don't want to 3-bet. The flop comes off 9-4-5 rainbow with one of my suit, right? I check. The low jack bets. He bets standard 1/3 pot. I decide to call it. I'm floating, but I'm also looking for improvement, right? And this is an exact example that happened. So I call it. The turn comes off the 8 of diamonds, right? So now I have a flush draw and I have a gut shot, right? The 10 of diamonds. So I have the King Jack. So I have a gut shot and a flush draw. So I've picked up equity. So the hands that are playing against me, I'm blocking, right? The straight draw combos, things like that, 2-pair combos, they're not very likely. So I check, and now this player bets half pot. Now, if they bet 2/3 pot, I could say that they were going for value. If they bet 1/3 pot, I could say that they were trapping. But they bet half pot, which to me in that scenario, and it kind of also depends on timing, in that scenario, it looks still weak. But as 90% of players will tell you, I can't continue, meaning I can't call, because even though I have all these outs, if I call with one card to come, I only have realistically 12 outs that I know are good for me. The flush may not be good because they're going to be up against ace queen suited. The straight cards, are the only really good ones for me, so I don't have a lot of pure equity. So instead of just calling that bet, I've taken to check raising it, right? So think about it. You're in the low jack, you open, and let's say you have pocket jacks. The flop comes off 10-9-4 or 10-8-4, whatever. And you bet the flop, the player calls. He checks the turn in the small blind. The turn comes off. It shouldn't do anything for the strength of his hand immediately. So you bet again, and you're betting half pot for value, right? Now you get check raised. Now what? Where are you? You know what I'm saying? Like, doesn't that seem like a set a lot? Doesn't it seem like 2-pair a lot? So I decided looking at that strong betting line with 2-pair, because I don't check raise that hand on the turn. I'm usually raising on the flop because I'm, fast play is the new slow play. But players who just call the flop and then, check call the flop, check raise the turn, typically that's a set, especially at the micros. So I started representing that, and even though I'm representing a very narrow range, when I'm up against 1-pair, it's very effective. Like, the player kind of has to have a set against me. And I've had players open fold the kings there to me. Like, as long as they don't have aces, you can usually get them off it. Yeah, I'd be stuck if that happened to me. That's the thing. So if you end up in situations where you're like, fuck, I don't know what to do here, understand you can then use that move as a counterpunch to other players. So if you're stuck in that situation and you're like, this is miserable, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here, shit, I have to fold, understand why that hand fucked you up so bad, and then use that as a move to make someone else fold, because you're a person. All people are very, very much similar. They're going to be, you can put them in the same spot when you don't have it. So you can then play this great bluff. And it's not overly complicated. It's very simple. If I had a set and I was a very basic player, this is what I would do. I made it obvious. Now the other player goes, I've seen this too many times. He's got a set, and he just folds. And they pat themselves on the back. Meanwhile, they just pissed 35 blinds into your stack for no reason. When, smartly, they should have probably checked the turn with one pair instead of putting themselves in that situation and go for value on the river. That's what I would do.
Realize that you really should have a good idea of how to play this spot, because this spot will come up a decent amount. Definitely adjust to whatever your opponent does wrong. You should know that by now, right? If the small blind's just going all in with any two cards, well, then obviously you should call off way wider than this, right? Let's get out Equilab real quick, and I'll show you what you should be calling with if the small blind goes all in with any two cards. So what you can do is you can give the small blind 100%. Let's get out the calculator to give ourselves, figure out our pot odds. If it was for 15 big blinds, we'd have to call 14 more to win a 31 big blind pot. 14 divided by 31 equals 45%. So now we just go to Tools, Hand Range Calculator, 45%. You should know how to do this by now. Click Take to Main Window, and you can see here, if they're jamming literally any two cards, even for 15 big blinds, we should call off this wide, which is really wide. Clearly, this is not going to be the case because most people don't open jam any two cards, but let's just say you know your opponent's that bad in doing that. That is how you'd figure out what to call. Now, what if you wanted to have a bit of an edge? Let's say you knew your opponent was jamming really wide, but you still wanted to win, let's say, 47%. Oops, I messed up here. You see what I did wrong? Let me show you. I left this range in. Okay, let's do it again. Tools, Hand Range Calculator, 47%. Now you would call off much tighter, which makes logical sense, right? If your opponent's jamming any two cards, but you want to have a bit more of an edge, you need to call off a little bit tighter.
And this philosophy works when the effective stack is 15. So if you're in the small blind with 50 blinds and the big blind has 15 big blinds and you know he's going to jam range and you have something in this hand, like if you know he's going to jam 80% of hands, you can start limping hands like Jack 9 suited, and when he jams, just call him off. It doesn't have to be you as the effective stack. The effective stack is what counts. So when you have the effective stack covered, if all these philosophies are the same, you're playing a 15 big blind hand versus this one player. So understand that's a factor too. Do you want to take that risk? Well, it's up to you. But it depends on the stage of the tournament. But for me, if I don't know what to do, I just use the effective stack as the narrative and then play as such. So if I was in the small blind with 15 big blinds, so the reality is I'm in the small blind with 60 blinds versus a player in the big blind who has 15 big blinds who will jam super wide, right? If I have any ace or any, ace in my hand or any semi-good king all the way down to king 9 suited or, the king 10 offsuit, any queen that falls in this range, any, 10 jack suited, jack 9 suited, all these hands and any pair, I'm just going to limp it. And when he jams, snap call. And you'd be surprised how many times I've been yelled at in a live tournament when I did this. And seeing people go, how the fuck do you call me with Jack 10? And they roll over 8-7. And then, they get eliminated. We take the race, whatever the fuck. I had a guy literally yell at the top of his lungs. And I was laughing like the fucking Joker. I was hysterically laughing at this guy. Because we were on the final table. And he was like, how the fuck are you trapping with that? And he was like, whatever. And I was like, I'm not even going to answer you, man, because you're too angry to understand. But if you don't stop yelling in my face, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. It literally escalated that quickly. And he was like a 60-year-old man, and he had a fucking cane and shit. And he was like, oh, did you? He actually told the floor man, he's like, did you hear that? He threatened me. And the floor man was standing right there, and he's like, sounds like you're threatening him. And he almost threw him out of the casino. And he was like, just leave the tournament area. It's over. And then later, the floor man came up to me and fucking shook my hand. And he was like, that was hilarious. He's like, I've been wanting to kill little man for years. Took me some time to adjust that I was playing against people at 10 and L with $3 and $4 at the table. But playing normal was losing me chips. Exactly. Perfect example. And you can use these tournament philosophies in a cash game versus a short stack player the same way it works the other way. So like you're it's then 30 or 40 big blinds effective instead of 100 big blinds effective. So, if a guy's got $4 on the table and you're sitting there with, this happened to me on WSOP last night. I had ace queen suited and the big blind had $4 and I raised and he 3-bet, and he was just reloading to $4. You can set that up so you reload to a lesser stack. When players do this, they're just inexperienced. They just don't understand. They need to have that money on the table in front of them to keep things from this happening. I raised, I think it was to like 3.5. This player 3-bet to 10, and I just jammed on him because ace queen suited is too strong to fold. So I just jammed on him, and he thought about it for a minute, and then he folded. And then like 2 rounds later, it happened again. And then 2 rounds later, it happened again. And he just never got the message that he doesn't have the chips. If he was 3-betting, he should have just jammed all in on me. And then I would fold the ace queen suited, but he kept putting himself in that situation. And yeah, so it's the effective stack you have to play for. Imagine you have the chips that this other player has.
So that's how you figure that out. What if you knew your opponent was going to limp everything besides the top 5% of hands, in which case they were going to go all in with those? Well, now we'd give our opponent an all-in range of whatever, the top 5% of hands. Something like this. And now we need to figure out what has 47% equity against that range. This is where everyone folds with a small blind. They limp or fold everything besides the absolute nuts. And then they go all in with that. In this scenario, as you can see, we can't really call much of anything. We can call it jacks or better, and ace-king, which makes sense because the opponent's playing only very strong hands. So definitely make sure you are accounting for your opponent's strategy, but this is a good, strong starting point that's going to make it very, very difficult for you to be exploited and take advantage of. And, clearly that is a very, very good place to be.
All right, give me 1 second. I got to grab, my stomach is actually like really hurting because I need to eat. I actually have a thing with my gallbladder where if I get too hungry, I start getting up in pain. Give me 10 seconds. I got to grab some. Sorry, I had to grab some cantaloupe. And just going to be eating that while we go. Let's see. Let's start the quiz. You're on the button with 15 big blinds facing a raise from under the gun. What should you do when you have ace-ace? This is a call. Because you're basically playing the hand like jokers. And 3-betting's not a great idea here because you don't want to scare them. Reopening the betting with a min 3-bet can work in some scenarios, like, I don't know, being on the final table, but honestly, it's just a call. You're slow playing, essentially, yeah. 15 big blinds, facing a raise from under the gun. Jack 10 suited. Well, on the button, I believe you can actually call this. This is one of those ones where your position is strong and the other player's range is strong, so I like calling. Yeah, profitable to call here because if you make a jack or a 10 as top pair or flop a draw, you're just going to get the money in and be very happy. 15 big blinds, you're in the big blind with 15 big blinds. Raise from the low jack, you have deuce-deuce. It's a jam, I believe. Yeah, because he's in a later position. He's raising wider. It's going to be harder for him to call without a stronger range, so jamming is fine. 15 big blinds facing a raise from the low jack in the big blind. Ace-10 suited. I think it's a jam. For me, it's a jam again at the stakes I play. But there is a very strong case for a call here. I'm going to go with my move. Nope. Yeah, you should call. Because you will not get called by a worse ace-x. You will not make better hands fold, so calling is best. Yeah, that's true. All right. Because we're holding the ace, we can dominate the aces that open there. The ace-9, ace-7, ace-8. Ace-5 suited, things like that. So, yeah, the call is better. Although you can see it was close. And more people answered go all in, but it was wrong. It's actually a call. All right, cool. Takes a lot of balls to do that, though. Small blind, 15 big blinds facing a raise from the button. What should you do when you have king 8 suited? I mean, it's a jam or fold. It's never a call. The hand's pretty weak, though. I'm going to fold. Okay. I could have looked it up. But it's in the jamming range. It's funny because my dividing line, I was thinking in my head, was king 9 suited. So I guess maybe I'm cutting it too close. With 15 big blinds, I do have a blocker. I am suited. All right, that's cool. All right, let's go on to the next one. Boys, you'll get some cantaloupe if you're good. All right, I got to eat a little bit, though.
Now let's discuss when you're facing a preflop raise and a call when you have between 12 and 22 big blinds. And if you think back to the charts I just showed you, you actually should not be facing a preflop raise and a call unless the call is exactly from the button or small blind, right? And for that reason, you're going to find that when someone does raise and someone calls from an earlier position, usually they are not playing all that well unless they are trying to get out of line and maximally exploit something their opponents do incorrectly. So you're really not going to be in this spot all that often unless your opponents are generally a little bit weak, a little bit tight, and a little bit afraid of jamming. So
over the course of about 800 to 1,000 hands, me playing a full schedule of tournaments, I will see this scenario come up. If I run deep in a tournament, I expect to see the situation come up 2 or 3 times out of 400 or 500 hands in that tournament. So it's not very common.
So if you did decide that you wanted to 3-bet, since a 3-bet would put in more than 30% of your stack, you should instead just go all in. So if you think about it with 22 big blinds, if someone raises 2 big blinds, someone calls, and you want to 3-bet to 8 big blinds, 8 big blinds is more than 30% of 22. So you should probably just jam it all in. And obviously that's the case as you get shallower. Realize, though, that when it does go raise call before you, you still get to have a calling range. And the main time you want to still have a calling range is from the later positions with hands that flop well. These are going to be the classic implied odds hands, like some suited aces, like some suited connectors, and like some small pairs. With the big offsuit cards, you're going to find that those almost always want to go all in or fold. And the reason for that is because they play pretty poorly multi-way in general, and they have very good blockers that will block your opponent's calling range, which is going to give you a large amount of fold equity. Remember, the pre-flop fold equity equation we discussed a while back now, that does still apply at this point. So make sure you understand that. Okay. In general, the caller will still usually be capped, but usually is very important here. And I want to give you an example. So when I'm playing about 20 big blinds deep or 15 big blinds deep, if someone raises under the gun, and I'm in early position as well with pocket aces or pocket kings, I personally very often call there. I do not go all in for 15 big blinds like the chart says. And the reason is because a lot of people make the blunder of jamming too wide over the raise and the call because they do think the caller will usually be capped, which I'm kind of flipping that concept on its head and slow playing my aces and kings. Also, if you do just call with pocket aces or kings and you do see a 2 or 3-way flop, that's fine because the pot's already 7 or 8 big blinds and you only have 13 big blinds left in your stack. It's not the end of the world, right? So this is a spot where...
Meaning you're fine getting it in.
Most players you encounter in small and medium stakes games who are calling preflop raises frequently, they are going to be capped. But if you see someone call very infrequently, alarm bells should go off. Anytime you see someone doing something infrequently, especially if it's something that should be a bad play and this person otherwise plays fundamentally sound, you should think they're trying to maximally exploit somebody. And if that's the case, then you should be very careful. Okay, so against a raise first end from a tight aggressive player, when they're the initial raiser, you should just play fundamentally sound poker, and that pretty much means just follow the charts you've already seen, perhaps calling a little bit wider with the suited connected hands and small pairs, and shoving a little bit more often with the offsuit big cards, because now there's just a bit more money in the pot that will probably be folded by the capped caller. Against a tight player, you should definitely fold the big suited card or big unsuited cards that are likely dominated. So if someone raises a tight player and someone calls and you're on the button, well, let's say king jack offsuit with a 15 big blind stack, this is an easy fold. You may say, well, isn't this a good blocker bluff? It would be, except for the initial raiser's not bluffing all that often. So no, it's not. What if you had a hand like ace jack offsuit? Well, now ace jack offsuit becomes a reasonable hand to consider bluffing, but if you really don't want to be bluffing because the initial raiser is very tight, you should instead call with this hand. And you are going to end up in some spots after the flop where you make top pair good kicker and have to put all your money in. But that is okay. If you get top pair good kicker, you're usually happy enough stacking off. So if it does go raise call and you have even a better hand like ace queen, it's probably okay to go ahead and shove with ace queen or pocket nines or better, something like that. Even against a tight raiser, unless you know they're just like the nittiest player you've ever seen. Against loose raisers, against a loose aggressive player, you should fold less often. Again, expanding your overall range. I used queen 8 suited a few times in examples earlier in this similar situation. Now queen 8 suited is going to be way too loose to call in almost every spot besides the big blind. But say someone does raise early position or middle position and you know they're loose and aggressive and someone calls and you have queen 9 suited or queen 8 suited on the button, I think it is definitely viable to call in that scenario. You could also, though, 3-bet all in that scenario, especially with blocker bluffs. Since queen 8 suited or queen 9 suited does flop reasonably well, I think it's probably okay to call. But if you had something like ace 9 offsuit or even ace 2 offsuit or king jack offsuit or king 10 offsuit, these are great hands to go all in with for about 15 or 20 big blinds over a loose raise.
Double broadways because of the blockers and removal that they have.
Because they are not going to call nearly often enough, which is going to make your jam very, very profitable. Against a calling station, you again want to expand your range a little bit because they're going to play poorly after the flop. Again, usually expanding it with the implied odds hands, suited aces, suited connected cards, suited big cards, and small and medium pairs. And now you're going to want to 3-bet all in more often, but instead of 3-betting all in with a lot of blocker bluffs, you want to be 3-betting with the strong value hands. It's like, just the best pairs, like pocket 8s and better, and things like ace 9 suited and better, ace 10 offsuit and better, king jack suited and better, king 10 suited and better. There we go, a little bit confused. King 10 suited and better, king jack offsuit and better, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, stuff like that. Because you should expect to get called by your opponent more often when they just have marginal junk. Like they'll raise ace 2 offsuit and then call it all in with it. If that's the case, well, obviously you want to be jamming like even ace 7 suited, right? So putting that all together, again, against a nit, against a tight player, 3-bet bluff way less often, and you should be calling with more implied odds hands. Against a calling station, just 3-bet straight up for value more often. Against a loose aggressive player, you can 3-bet bluff all in more often, usually with blockers. And against a good, strong, tight, aggressive player, just continue to remain balanced. From the big blind, facing a raise and a caller, or a raise and multiple callers, realize that, again, getting a good price and closing the action are not good enough reasons to defend your big blind multi-way, for many reasons, because you're going to realize your equity poorly, because you're going to end up playing your hands poorly after the flop, meaning, let's say someone does raise and someone calls and you have king 6 offsuit in the big blind. If you do see a 4-way flop here, and it does come king XX or any flop with a 6, if you check and someone bets and someone calls, you probably should just fold already. And if that's going to be the case, pretty often when you're playing multi-way, when you flop well, pair's pretty good, that's just not where you want to be. You don't want to be in a bad spot when you flop well. Whenever you do flop well, you want to be happy putting your money in. And you're going to find that the junky offsuit big card, little card hands are really bad here. So you typically want to avoid playing hands that make mostly marginal made hands, because even with a shallow stack, you really don't want to have a marginal made hand. In this scenario, jamming all in with hands with an equity or an ace blocker is still a powerful strategy. Like say it does go raise, call, and you have king jack suited or ace 9 offsuit with a 15 or 20 big blind stack. That's a pretty nice spot to shove because you're just having a lot of fold equity. And the nice thing is whenever there are a bunch of callers, like say someone raises and 3 people call, those 3 callers' money is pretty dead. Now every once in a while you'll jam something like ace 9 offsuit. The initial raise will fold. The first 2 callers will fold. It'll get back around to the last caller and they'll say, well, I'm getting pretty good odds, so I guess I should call pretty wide. The nice thing about that is that sometimes they're going to call with stuff like jack 9 suited and 9-8 suited and king 9 offsuit because they use pot odds and closing the action to justify their call. And at that point, again, it's not really a great reason if they know that you're jamming reasonable high card hands or hands with equity. So let's say there is a raise and a call. Hands like Queen 6 offsuit, Jack 5 offsuit, King 6 offsuit, etc. They should just all be folded. You definitely do not want to play those hands multi-way. If you're against a tight raiser or a large number of players, even stuff like Ace-X offsuit should probably be folded if you like to not use it as a bluff. Like let's say a tight player raises early position and then a bunch of people call. With Ace-6 offsuit in the big blind, you should just fold. King-X suited and Queen-X suited, those are dicey. Like King-X suited, maybe it's okay to still stick around if you know your opponents are going to be really passive after the flop. But you really do just want to sidestep these spots that are going to be very, very rough after the flop. Now, in the post-flop section, we'll get to, eventually, I promise it's coming, we will be discussing how to play these marginal hands if you do happen to find yourself in these situations, but quite often the best course of action is just to avoid them altogether.
The eventually it's coming is because the pre-flop section, it's the one everybody should have the most study on because it's the make or break point of the hand for a lot of points throughout a tournament. All right, let's play the quiz. Low jack raises, cutoff calls. You're on the button with 18 big blinds. Should you have a non-all-in 3-bet range? Hey, what's up, Casero? How you doing, my man? Honestly, I don't think so. I think you can have a non-3-bet all-in range with hands like aces, but I think for the most part the answer is no. Yeah, you're stacked depth because player raises to 2 big blinds, somebody calls it, your 3-bet is going to be at least 7 or 8 big blinds. You're getting more than a third of your stack in the pot. Just go ahead and jam. Finally, time for your stream. Yeah. Nice, my man. Yeah, I've been starting a little early, so you've been missing it. But usually I'm still on at around noon. And today we're going to go a little bit longer because I want to finish this section. There's only 2 more parts of this section to go. We're doing the 22 to 12 big blind stack pre-flop. We're most of the way through it, but it's all on YouTube if you want to watch it again. See, the low jack and cutoff calls. All right. Low jack raises, cutoff calls. You're on the button with 18 big blinds. King, queen off. What should you do? I'm liking the all-in. King, queen suited, you can make an argument for calling, but honestly, with 18 big blinds, I think it's still a jam. I like the all-in here a lot. It's just better because you don't want to play multi-way, and you make a pair, you're probably going to be good. So just go all in. Mark this is complete. Let's see how long the next section is. I think there's 2 more sections. Yeah.
Now let's discuss when someone raises, you call, and then you get 3-bet, playing with a 12 to 22
Hey,
big blind
thanks for the
stack.
cheers, my man.
At this point, you have to realize, when you do get 3-bet, you will be facing an all-in. So, we have a math problem. Math problems are great. Let's do another one. Let's say, in this situation, someone raises from middle position, and we are on the button. We already know we're only going to have a flat calling range from the button or the small blind or the big blind. But if in this scenario, if we're in the big blind, we would be closing the action, so that doesn't matter, right? So let's say everyone folds to low jack seat. We're on the button. What is our strategy? Well, let's take a look. Low jack versus button. Okay? That means this here is our range. We have pocket aces. King Jack suited, King 10 suited, Queen 10 suited, Jack 10 suited, 10 9 suited, 6s 5s, Ace 7, Ace 6, Ace 3 suited. Okay? That is my strategy. What is our opponent doing? Well, this is where you have to do a little bit of thought, a little bit of consideration. Let's say they're in the small blind here. Maybe they're actually jamming exactly this small blind strategy after we flat call. So let's just give them that range because that's what we think this particular player is doing in this instance. So they would be jamming it all in with something like this, which actually seems, not too absurd. If they're in the small blind, what would I do in this spot? I'd probably do something like this, actually. Maybe I wouldn't jam Jack 10 suited or Queen Jack suited. Maybe I flat call those, but whatever. This is certainly viable. So if they're jamming this, we need to figure out our pot odds, right? Let's just go through here. So this is when someone raises 2 big blinds. I call, they go all in. So the pot total is going to be their 15, my 15. The initial raise is 2, and then the big blind and the ante. So that would be 34. So we have to put in 13 to win 34. Is that right? I think that's right. Yeah. So we need 38% equity, and we want to have something like, 40% equity to make sure we have an edge. So tools, hand range calculator. Let's set this to 40. Calculate hand range. Take to the main window. Here we go. So in this case, these are all the hands that I can profitably call with. And let me show you that if we opened with, where am I going to put this? I'll put it right here, I guess. Slightly off the screen, I know. So if we called the raise with aces, we should call it off clearly. If we called the raise with ace-7 suited, notice it's not on the chart, so we should fold. Same thing with all these lower aces. If we called with king-jack suited, we should call. Same with king-10 suited, queen-10 suited, jack-10 suited, but not 10-9 suited. And then with 6s and 5s, we should also call. You may say, why are we calling off in this scenario with hands that aren't actually all that great? Well, the reason is because we gave this opponent a pretty wide shoving range. And if they are shoving with this strategy, we in turn have to call off with these hands, even having a decent edge built in. And that's because we're getting really good pot odds. At this point, we had
the suited king-jack is one that'll happen for me quite a bit, and the suited king-10. I've noticed, and when I originally watched this section, it didn't really make an impact for me. And then it was a couple months later, and I was playing a tournament, and this section kind of snapped back into my head for some reason. And I actually had exactly king-jack in that scenario, and I ended up calling it. And the player did jam, properly wide with ace-8, and my call, I was loving my call there. So this is one that took me a little bit longer to absorb, but understanding the actual ranges and then getting the correct pot odds, is absolutely essential to what your strategy is going to be. You're not always going to fold the king-jack suited when you call on the button if the small blind jams. You just have to understand the real dynamic of your stack. And at that moment, I had like 15 blinds left, I think, after the call. And I just did the math in my head, and I was like, okay, well, yeah. So if I'm 60-40 here, I'm good. And I actually turned out to be about 42%, which was even better. And I ended up winning the hand, but that's inconsequential.
I had to put in 13 to win 34. I mean, it's hard to not win 13 divided by 34 with any reasonable hand. And this is why it's important for you to make sure your calling range is really strong. So that's usually what we're doing in this scenario. If we thought the shover was shoving tighter, well, we can go through and figure that out, right? Let's suppose they call that, they call these, they don't play these. Let's presume they're now doing something like this instead. We can figure out the same thing, right? Tools, hand range calculators, same numbers. You see now we can only call with 5s or better, ace-10 suited better, and ace-jack offsuit or better. So if our opponent's just even a little bit tighter, you see these king-10 suited, queen-10 suited, jack-10 suited, and the lowest pairs become folds, right? So you see just that little adjustment, making our opponent a little bit tighter, made us now start to fold out the majority of our range. And that's okay, because notice here, right? We're only calling with aces, 6s, and 5s. I believe, yeah, aces, 6s, and 5s. Everything else in our flat calling range gets folded, because notice we don't have any of these other big cards because we would have jammed in ourselves. And you may say, well, isn't that bad if we're only going to call with aces, 6s, or 5s? And no, not really. And the reason is because, well, aces, 6s, and 5s makes up 18 combinations out of our 50 hands. So right there we're already calling, 38% of the time, which is nowhere near the minimum defense frequency. Well, actually, it's probably close. But we also have to realize that the initial raiser is going to call the all-in some portion of the time, too. So realize the initial raiser is going to be raising with their good, strong raising range, and when they have the top, 8 or 9% of hands are always going to call it off. So we actually don't need to defend the entire minimum defense frequency here. We have to defend way, way less than that. So you're going to be perfectly fine just calling off with usually just your best hands, unless you're getting really good action or really good pot odds and you think the opponent's range is very, very wide. So what about the other scenario where someone raises, someone calls, we get someone goes all in, and then the initial raiser calls. Well, now let's put in two ranges. Let's give this player the same range they already had, and let's give the initial raiser a pretty good, strong calling range. Maybe something like this. Okay? So now at this point, the total pot's going to be everyone's 15 big blinds, so 45 plus the big blind in the ante, let's just say. So that's going to make the pot 47 big blinds. So we have to put in 13 divided by 47 equals 27%. So now we need to have 27% equity, but against 2 ranges. And let's build in a little bit of wiggle room. So let's say 29. Tools, hand range calculator, make this 29. Click calculate. Ooh, this is going to take forever. Oh, there it goes. Okay. And the reason it's taking longer is because it's running you against 2 ranges instead of 1. So as you add in more data here, the program will take a little bit more time. I can already tell you we're going to be calling off really nitty. If you go back to that range, remember we only had pocket aces and pocket sixes and pocket fives that could call off against a tight range to begin with, and now we're against multiple
But we
ranges.
don't have it, so I guess it's just aces.
We're in pretty bad shape here.
It's just aces and
as you see,
ace-queen suited.
We are calling off with only 9s or better, ace-king, and ace-queen suited. And remember, our calling range in that spot on the button that I already gave us.
Yeah, those hands aren't there. The 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, we're going to 3-bet those. So it's only aces and I believe ace queen suited might be in there, but ace king suited, ace king off, we're just jamming all those pre. So I think that's the only hand. So we're going to have
pocket aces. That is the only hand in our range that can conceivably call in this.
Oh, ace king suited, even 3-bets.
And you may say, is that a problem? Well, you want to make sure you have pocket aces in your range to make sure your range is protected. You're going to find that especially if you expect to get jammed on frequently, and you will find that some players will jam on you very frequently, you really, really, really want to have a protected range. This may even mean calling with pocket kings sometimes. If someone raises and you are yet to act and you expect to get 3-bet a lot, all in usually, you do want to slow play a little bit more with aces and kings and maybe even queens. You should be slow playing queens and ace king way less than aces or kings. Like I mentioned earlier, I do like slow playing aces a lot in pretty much every position because people do seem to like to jam pretty wide over a raise and a call or a raise and multiple calls. And if you see a post-flop pot with aces 3 ways, it's fine. Same thing with kings, it's fine. Now, when you do slow play with pocket kings, sometimes there's going to be an ace on the flop and you end up having to just lose a small pot. But that's okay. Just because you started with a strong hand doesn't mean you're going to end with a strong hand. So, really understand that this scenario is a math problem. And once you start talking about like getting all of your chips in when you're playing really shallow stacked, a lot of these situations are math problems. So you really want to make sure you get very comfortable with the idea of understanding how math dictates your play. There really isn't any guesswork needed here. I get emails all the time when people say, someone raised, I called, someone went all in, the first guy folded. What should I do? And I already showed you how to figure that out yourselves. Now you never have to wonder what you should do in these spots. The only thing you really have to wonder about is the jammer's range. And if you pay attention, you will start to see what people are actually jamming with on a regular basis, and then you'll be able to make good assessments about your opponent's range. And then just a nice easy math problem, plug it in, and then you will have the answer.
Yeah, the amount of times that I make snap calls and people in the chat go, what the fuck are you doing? It's like, because I know the math already. It's like, oh, well, I can't fold. There's a great hand in, I think it's Jedi Mind Tricks number 9, where I had jacks and this player was acting super slow and he didn't have enough chips to make me fold. I had raised and he only had like 15 blinds or something. Or he had raised and he had like 22 blinds. I 3-bet the jacks on the button for like 7 blinds, and it goes back to him, and it was this long hand, and he ended up jamming, and I just snap called it with the jacks. And it's I even said there's a lot of times here where this guy's going to have aces or kings, but I just can't fold because the math doesn't dictate that I should fold against this range. And sure enough, he had kings. Funny part of that one was that I ended up hitting the jack on the turn, and it was like, good, you shouldn't be playing that slow anyway, because if he understood the math, he wouldn't have taken that long. He was trying to get me to call, and there was literally no effort to call because it cost me like, I think it was like 12 big blinds to win 50, so it's like, I'm never folding jacks there. It's just fucking ridiculous. All right, let's play the quiz. Low jack raises 2 big blinds out of the 22 big blind effective stack we have. You call with ace jack suited on the button. Small blind goes all in, low jack folds. I'm going to call this as a call all day long. Yeah. Great equity against the jamming range because the small blind's range is going to be weaker against our actual hand. You know what I'm saying? If we had something like king jack suited, it would be closer because of the amount of blinds. If we had something like king 10 suited, I think it would be a fold. But yeah, ace jack suited is obviously great. So we're going to mark this as complete, and I believe we're going into the last section of this. So we'll finish this up today. Yeah.
Now let's discuss when you're facing a preflop raise and a 3-bet before the action gets to you when you are playing 12 to 22 big blinds deep. So at this point, realize that you will be facing a raise and an all-in the vast majority of the time. Maybe if both players have deeper stacks, you'll be facing a raise to, let's say, 2 big blinds, a 3-bet to 6 or 7 big blinds. And now if you have 15 big blinds and you go all in, you clearly have no fold equity. You're going to get called basically every time. So in this situation, we have a pure math problem, but it becomes very muddled. And for that reason, I'm just going to give you some very basic advice here. Whenever you are facing normal-ish ranges, where neither player is too tight or too loose, when it goes raise 3-bet in front of you, you should really only be calling off with something like 10s or better and ace-queen or better. And that's it. Very, very, very tight, right? And the reason is because you can be slightly wider if you knew the initial raiser was always going to fold, but the initial raiser is not always going to fold. The initial raiser is going to call sometimes. So for that reason, you need to have a stronger hand than if you were just calling off the...
So imagine being in the deep middle parts of a tournament and you have 15 big blinds. There's maybe 2 or 3 tables left. You're deep in the cash, and there's a player with, 2 players who have about 50 blinds apiece, right? And they're to your right. And, they're in the low jack or the high jack and the cutoff, and you're in the small blind or something. One guy raises, the other guy calls, or the one guy raises to 2, the other guy 3-bets to 6 or 7, whatever it is, and you're in the small blind. You pretty much just want 10s and better, ace queen plus is what he's saying, and you just jam it because you're never going to get both these guys to fold. If the initial raiser decides to fold because he doesn't know what the guy behind him is doing, then yeah, you'll get that fold. But then the guy who's behind already has 7 blinds in there. It costs him 8 to call to win 32 blinds. He's never folding at 4-1. So you just need to have a hand that holds up well. And 10s plus, ace queen plus, that's it.
The 15 big blind all in. If your opponents are both a little bit tighter, let's say under the gun raises second player 3-bets, or if you just know the 3-better is really tight when it comes to shoving, then you have to be even tighter, perhaps only ace king and pocket jacks. Usually you can get it in with ace king and pocket jacks unless you're against like 2 super nitty ranges where under the gun raises second position 3-bets and they're both not out of line. Then you probably want like ace king suited and pocket queens. So that's how you get a little bit tighter. If the players are a little bit looser, let's say the cutoff raises and the button 3-bets, and you know the button 3-bets a lot, now you can get a little bit wider, but even then it's only going to get down to something like pocket 8s or better and ace 10 suited and better and ace jack offsuit. So you're still just not all that loose. You have to realize when you are calling it off against an all-in, you just have to have something good. When you lack fold equity, you must have a pretty strong hand. I mean, let me show you the loosest example, the loosest situation where let's say cutoff raises button 3-bets. In this situation, let's suppose the initial raise or the button is jamming with, I don't know. Let's just make him kind of loose. I mean, you can make him as loose as you'd like and see that you get to call off a little bit wider. Let's give him any pair, any ace because he's insane. We'll make him insane. And the thing is now, let's say it goes 2 big blinds, 15 all in, and now it's up to us. We have to put in 15, 14, something like that, depending on our position, to try to win 34.5 total. Okay, so let's figure out the math. 15, let's just call it 15, divided by 34.5 total equals 43%. We're going to want more like 45 or 46% to break, to have a bit of an edge. Let's do 45.5, sure. So now, against that range, you see we actually could conceivably profitably call off with all of these. The problem you're going to run into, though, is that sometimes the initial raiser is going to call as well. So we're going to need more equity than this. And you're going to find that what roughly happens is you have to get rid of these hands, you have to get rid of like these hands. And you see it's just me kind of like straight cutting off the bottom pile of hands. And that's going to result in you profitably being able to get it in with something like this. In tournaments, sometimes there are going to be payout implications too, especially once we get shallower. We're going to be discussing those in a future section. So that's going to result in you maybe even having to be a little bit tighter because you really don't want to be getting it all in with a roughly break even or even slightly profitable spot in terms of chips because you're trying to win dollars, right? So now you're stuck calling more like this, which is, again, really tight. So my best advice to you is whenever you're facing a raise and a 3-bet, especially against players who really should not be all that out of line because they are tight, conservative, not trying to risk their stack without something good, you should be very snug. So please do not think you have to get it all in very wide in these scenarios, because the vast majority of the time, the shover's going to have something pretty good, and every once in a while, the initial raiser's going to surprise you with aces, kings, queens, jacks, or ace-king, and you want to make sure you're getting it in good in these spots, because it really is for all your chips. But anytime you're calling off all your chips in the tournament, you need a pretty decent edge, and facing one normal range and a presumably tight range, it's pretty hard to have an edge unless you have a very premium hand.
Pretty self-explanatory. Let's go ahead and do the quiz, and I believe that wraps up this section. Low jack raises to 2 big blinds. Button goes all in for 15. You have 18 big blinds with 10-10 in the big blind. Yeah, you're probably calling here. Yep, 10-10's got the equity. Low jack raises 2 big blinds. Button goes all in for 15 blinds. You have ace-10 off on the big blind. I think I still like it, honestly. I think I still like it. It's close. I think ace-jack is kind of automatic. Yeah. No, ace-10. Not quite enough. All right. So I was right. Ace-jack, not ace-10. All right. That's cool. Okay, we're going to mark this as... we're going to put next. We're going to mark this as complete. And I don't mind getting them wrong, because that lets me go back through the section and see what I did. Okay, so this is the course content. We got through all this in 2 days. That's pretty good. Mark it as complete. This should take us back to the main section. And we're going to go back to the courses. And we're going to see how much more we have to go. And you can see the next section, less than 12 big blinds. There is still play. Let's see here. 17% complete. That's nice. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. Oh, and by the way, the thumbnail for this section, because this is going to take a second to load. There we go. So this is the preflop strategy. We're going to go here. Okay, we've marked all that as complete. Okay, so the last section of preflop is these 4 parts. Probably just going to bang that out tomorrow. If you're looking for the thumbnail for this section of 12 to 22 big blinds on YouTube, it's this one. You can see that picture of me there. You'll just see part 2 today, episode 70. And that'll be that for this section. And then we'll get the pre-flop section, less than 12 big blinds. I believe today is a play day. I feel pretty good. I was looking at this in the last few minutes there. I'm probably going to come back around... let me see. I definitely like this. Yeah, I think I'm going to come back in about an hour or so and play. So we're going to try to play at like 2 o'clock. There's also a flight. I may get into that. I don't know. We're definitely going to spin it, so maybe we'll spin our way in. But I like that one. This progressive knockout is... I'm going to be a little bit late to enter this, so I'm probably going to play this 4K. Yeah, I like that format. The 4K $11, the 2500 440. This progressive knockout 6 max is a good one. And there's other stuff. This 1K starting at 230. This 2K starting at 230. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. So, yeah, I think in about an hour. Catching 2 streams you might play yourself? Well, yeah, man, play along with me. Get in the same games. Why not? I hope you win second in every tournament I play. Yeah, so I'll be back in about an hour, maybe 45 minutes. When does this one start? This I think is the tent pole. This one right here. So that's in about 45 minutes. It's going to be close. That's at 1:30, but I can definitely do it. I just got to get a couple things taken care of. So yeah, I think I'm going to try to come back about 1:30, 2 o'clock. That's about 45 minutes to an hour. And I'll see you guys then. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm not going to send out a host because obviously I got shit to do, and you guys can find somebody you want to watch till then. And I'll see you in a bit.